Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Josh Hammer, and I'm a partner solution architect with Amazon Web Services. And today we're going to talk about how Ancestry manages risk in their application environments with Qualys on AWS. At AWS, we say security is job zero, meaning it's our top priority. And when we talk to organizations about it, we explain to them that you will actually see many of the same physical security controls that you see on a normal data center with AWS. We have the separation of our storage as well as our data centers and isolations of networks. And with that, we provide you with a shared responsibility model. And that shared responsibility model breaks down into this concept of security of the cloud, which is what AWS does. So we will make sure that the infrastructure, the data centers, the networking, the hypervisor, all the way up to the host OS we're going to give you are secured. After that, the parts that we give you to build with are Amazon Web Services. All those 160 services, it's your responsibility to control, secure, and configure to meet your company's data security and information security policies. Now, when companies come to AWS, they actually find out that they can actually do something they've not been able to do before. Generally, in the traditional environments, which we'll talk about, customers had to make a decision between moving fast or staying secure, because understanding how to put security in, how to scale and automate was always challenged because security had to come in after and didn't have tooling and solutions to be able to make it easier for them. When it comes to the traditional space, what it looked like is you had two big challenges. One, you were responsible for what we'll call the undifferentiated heavy lifting. All of the management of the infrastructure, all of the management of plugging in servers and networking and routing, all of the updating of the hypervisors and the host OSs of those hypervisors, managing access controls, making sure people did not have access to servers or systems when they shouldn't. Then you had to manage the controls that you needed to support that infrastructure. And what ended up happening is that you had some great automation in certain areas, but overall, there wasn't a huge amount of automation in other areas because you were relying on the fact that you kind of controlled and owned the whole space. And it provided this kind of lack of visibility. And I always like to use the example of when I was working at a large financial services company. We did a data center move and we discovered servers that we didn't know we had when we moved some stuff out. And that lack of visibility is just a challenge in the traditional world. And why when you use AWS, you can actually improve your visibility and increase automation. And that will allow you to scale, because the benefit of using AWS is that you have the ability to scale elastically. You can request an asset at the minimum amount of performance you need. Predominantly, when you normally ordered a server, you would request, to make sure that it met your max peak workload. With AWS, you can select a server sizing that just meets your day-to-day workload, and then know that you can elastically scale up. And when you scale up, you can know that that server will have the same configuration and the same packages already on it and ready to go, because you can control it and manage it through the tools that we offer with AWS. And what this really does is it allows you to have a standard, this gold image that you can then leverage to really reduce your risk and to automate. You can also start to look at your environment to see what instances have not had patches. And instead of just knowing that I have this many instances without patches, you can use our integrations to be able to make queries to make those updates. The idea here comes is that everything we do is an API. And that allows you to actually communicate directly with the AWS to make changes to things. So for example, you can make a direct communication call to change a security group, which is like a firewall on an EC2 instance, to disable or add a blacklist IP address. You can automate that in real time. You can also notice if a system is missing a patch. You can deploy a patch for it automatically with AWS Systems Manager. And this kind of automation allows you to create rules that check and configure your AWS environment. And partners like Qualys can actually look at your AWS information and your accounts and see configurations that might need to be improved. And when they do find one, you can then leverage their integrations to then go up and remediate that issue. So for example, that EC2 instance, maybe it was too big and you wanted to downsize it, or you needed to encrypt it. You could automate that entire process through our APIs and our services. Now, with the AWS Cloud, you actually inherit all of the security and compliance controls, which I'll show you later, the ability to scale, the privacy and security controls that we offer. Because at the end of the day, you own your data in AWS, and you are responsible for managing the controls to that data and who can access it. We give you encryption services that can help you control additional access, as well as other solutions that can tell you where your data is and what's using it. And you can leverage that for automation. And we have the largest ecosystem of partners. And these partners aren't just system integrators that will deploy and help you manage your infrastructure. We have partners like Qualys that build solutions on AWS to help improve our customers. And that synergy helps to add to our features and our functionality. When you look to meet your data security requirements, you can leverage the fact that AWS has a lot of the certifications already available to it for the baseline infrastructure that we provide. So you inherit those when you go forward with compliance requirements. You then need to go build your own controls for your own infrastructure on that with encryption, as well as to meet your access controls associated to the regulatory requirement you have. And if you look at the amount of compliance and security controls we have, certifications we have a lot across the space, and generally can meet most of the needs of any of your auditors. Now, when it comes to actually getting all this stuff done, we provide a variety of security services that we like to categorize based on our cloud adoption framework, also called the CAF. The cloud adoption framework breaks it into 5 categories. The first is identity and access management. And this is the front door to your AWS account, and it's the most important one. And you can use AWS IAM to manage who has access to what resources, how people come in, whether it's through federation or through AWS single sign-on, how you manage your credentials through Secrets Manager, or how you manage multiple accounts through AWS organizations. And then we have detective controls, because as I said, we need it to scale and we need visibility. So we provide you with aggregation sources like AWS Security Hub. We have an intrusion detection system that analyzes threat intelligence called Amazon Guard Duty for services inside your VPC, which is your virtual private cloud, as well as logins to your AWS account. We have config, which allows you to set baselines and run rules across your entire environment of 53 different services. We have CloudTrail, which if you don't know if you have it on today, my ask for you is to go look and turn it on. As I said earlier, every call is an API call, and CloudTrail is where we log that. And then we have CloudWatch for logging the applications and services that you have running in the cloud, and a VPC flow log for errors, as well as to do some analysis on traffic inside of your virtual private cloud. We have Systems Manager, as I mentioned, to do patch management and server management. This gives you an inventory of your solutions. We have Shield for DDoS protection. We have a web application firewall, and we have the virtual private cloud, which is how you build your data center in AWS. From a data protections perspective, we have a variety of services, starting with their key management service, also called KMS. And this allows you to manage your symmetric keys in a centralized place to leverage in other AWS services. We even have our Cloud HSM, which is a physical FIPS 140-2 physical appliance that you can use to manage your encryption for higher level regulatory requirements. We have a certificate manager for managing your SSL certificates, and then we have the ability to also do server-side encryption before you send the data to us. And when it comes to responding to incidents, we have those rules that you can scan, and we have Lambda, which is serverless, and it allows you to define an individual function so that you can react to a change in a rule. And with our partner solutions like Qualys, they can enrich the information from both the infrastructure piece by looking at the vulnerabilities on your EC2 instance, as well as also looking into configurations and changes that are happening in your AWS account. I appreciate your time right now, and I'm going to turn it over to Hari, the Director of Product Management for Qualys.
Thank you. Welcome you all. Today, I'm going to introduce you to Qualys and discuss solutions about what Qualys offers for securing your AWS workloads, and then turn it over to Grant from Ancestry to talk about how you utilize Qualys to secure their AWS application deployments. Qualys, the security solutions provider, has a platform which provides more than 20 plus solutions. We have more than 12,000 plus customers around the world. Qualys created an interesting venture into security when it started off all with cloud. We were born in cloud, and we had a fresh approach towards how to distribute security solutions as a cloud provider, cloud-based solution. In thinking about Qualys, these 20 plus solutions provide a variety of security controls which help you to identify your infrastructure, maintain or identify a vulnerability posture, and maintain compliance across your global IT, be it on premise or be it on your cloud. As you migrate to cloud, as you start your journey to cloud, the context switches in terms of how you secure things. The way Qualys does things is security is built in compared to being bolted on or just being added as an additional entity when it comes to managing your cloud infrastructure. Qualys Cloud solutions are all consolidated under a single platform. These solutions are accessible via APIs and at the same time available via UI. The Qualys Cloud Platform is available it's a multi-tenant platform available as its own cloud-based solution. At the same time, for companies who have restrictions to data governance and other things, Qualys solutions can be deployed within their enterprise. When it comes to cloud, we can break cloud into 4 parts. Depending upon the layer which you want to secure, and their shared security responsibility model for that layer differs. So let me start off with infrastructure as a service, where you are renting or you're harvesting the workloads from the cloud provider. Then platform as a service, and software as a service, and then the underlying infrastructure, which is your fabric of your cloud. Infrastructure as a service is a notion where you have your EC2 instances, container workloads, other things running in cloud. And platform as a service, a perfect example from the AWS world is AWS RDS. As you go down to the infrastructure, it's your underlying fabric, which means that where you bring in your accounts, where you have your network connectivity, ACLs, and the rest of the other services like storage buckets, which are using to establish your application in cloud. Qualys provides security solution which covers the entire gamut. For infrastructure as a service, Qualys provides solutions starting from helping you to gain visibility into what you have, to secure them using vulnerability management, compliance, and application security. I'll talk a little bit more about it in the next slide. As you go towards platform as a service, you have restricted access to the infrastructure because infrastructure is provided by the cloud provider, and they take care of securing the underlying infrastructure. Your responsibility is to secure or identify issues with the configuration and the data which you're using. Qualys provides solutions on that front as well. And as you kind of move down to the infrastructure layer, the biggest risk here is to have things being misconfigured. It's easy to set up things in cloud, but if you're not careful enough to set up things in cloud, you might be having issues. The idea here is, along with the inherent solutions available with AWS, we are amplifying those solutions by providing you more visibility into what you have, what your security posture of those infrastructure elements, and providing you with solutions with that front. In that case, we have these 2 solutions called Cloud Inventory and Cloud Security Assessment helping you with that. Let's take a step back. When you start off thinking about cloud, the first thing which comes to your mind is about your EC2 instance and the rest of your workloads which you migrate to cloud. When you think about workloads, the main way to focus on your workloads is how do you harden your workloads against issues which you can identify, and how you can standardize them so that it becomes repeatable as you kind of deploy it in an elastic environment. The three top solutions which apply to this in this front is vulnerability management, compliance, and application security. When you think about vulnerability management, it extends. It's not just about identifying vulnerabilities by which are inherent in the operating system, but Qualys provides a unique value prop. Qualys is in a unique position to deliver you a solution where it can also identify vulnerability from an external perspective, which means whatever your hacker can see, how does the you can also visualize your environment from that perspective and identify if there are any vulnerabilities coming in from outside. So vulnerability management from Qualys provides both internal vulnerability, discovery of internal vulnerabilities, and also the ones which are in the perimeter. We further increase or amplify the signal on vulnerabilities identified by using threat intelligence coming in from detecting if these vulnerabilities are actively used in the wild in any kind of exploits. So with threat protection from Qualys, you're able to identify that and prioritize vulnerabilities a lot better. With indicators of compromise, you're identifying if there have been breaches on your environment, if there are any malware which is there in your environment. And with patch management, you're able to apply and mitigate a patch. This is a new solution which are coming out right now, and as we kind of move forward, we'll be integrating with Systems Manager in AWS to kind of have an automated remediation solution with the AWS native Systems Manager solution. When it comes to policy compliance, we have the largest library of compliance regulatory checks available for different environments using on your EC2 instances, and also the applications are running on them. For PCI mandate, we are an assessor of PCI. We provide you reports which can directly give it to your auditors for PCI. As far as PCI is concerned, file integrity monitoring solution becomes important. We also provide you with that solution to give you a complete coverage across on your policy compliance environment. Then moving further slightly up the stack, which is like if you're running applications, identifying, let's say, OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, or the modern applications are written primarily by communicating with each other via the REST API interfaces, identifying vulnerabilities in those REST API. With Qualys applications scanning solution, you're able to scan those the web applications and also the REST APIs for vulnerabilities. In addition to it, we also provide you with a firewall solution, which in conjunction with the web application scanning can provide you with a solution for virtual patching, which means that you can protect against a known breach, which is attack which is happening by applying a virtual patch on the firewall, eliminating that from creeping it further down to your application. How do we do all of these things? Qualys provides a wide variety of sensors. Qualys sensors are applicable to the global IT. But when it comes to AWS, there are a few sensors which are very, very focused towards AWS environment. To begin with, we have connectors to cloud, connectors to your AWS accounts. You can set up ARN-based connectors to kind of look into your cloud environment and identify what workloads and what services you're running in cloud. The cloud connectors further seed this information further across to the platform, which applies different security solutions. With virtual scanners, if you move towards your left, with virtual scanner appliance, you can do network-based scanning. This is where you can actually have an internal scanning done via network-based approach, or you can have a perimeter scan where you can scan your perimeter from outside and identify the vulnerabilities. Then we also have agents. We'll talk a little bit more about it as we kind of go forward, and also as we move forward towards the next presenter. The agents are lightweight in nature. They are configurable. They are extremely suitable for an elastic workload like the ones we run in AWS Cloud. With agents, we'll see an approach. What we're going to be talking about is the Golden AMI pipeline integration, helping you to embed these agents to gain immediate visibility into the instances as soon as they get spun up. As you move towards your right side of the screen, we have internet scanners, which are providing you with the perimeter scanning functionality, and web application firewalls, which are available to protect your web application, which work in conjunction with the web application scanning solution from AWS. All of these tools are available to be downloaded. The application, the appliances, and the firewall solutions are available to be downloaded directly from AWS Marketplace. And AWS Marketplace also hosts other Qualys solutions which you can readily buy and deploy them into your environment. As companies move towards cloud, taking a step back and looking at it, another biggest movement which also happening along with that, with this IT transformation, is a transformation of how processes are happening. DevOps is a key ingredient of this cloud transformation. Developers are able to participate directly in terms of pushing and delivering their code faster enough to adapt to their business needs much quicker based upon these cloud platforms, and the recent available tools which help them to automate the delivery mechanism. Security normally would have been an afterthought if not for automation. What we're going to looking at here is an ability where Qualys can be integrated as a part of the reference architecture with AWS on this Golden AMI pipeline. As you develop your application, as you standardize your applications on a certain specific set of AMIs, we're able to integrate Qualys solutions into that AMI pipeline, evaluating or identifying issues ahead of the time. Once any issues are identified, you can mitigate them and during the cycle of creation itself. And as these environments, as these AMIs are being created, you can embed the agents into them and mark them as your Golden AMI, which you further use to distribute to deploy across different environments. These AMIs deliver a standardized, secure, pre-hardened set of application environment across your cloud. As the next speaker kind of talks about how you utilize Qualys in their environment, they're going to talk about more of the best practices around this solution. I'll let him explain this a little bit more in detail. But the buck doesn't stop there. Once you have a deployment enabled via AMI, you would like to kind of understand how it's impacting your projects or your environments within your company. With Qualys Asset View, we're able to provide you visibility into what you have in cloud. You can also customize this asset view to kind of have signals coming in specifically from your specific applications or specific tags or specific state of regions where you've deployed things. You can also track AMIs which you have hardened or pre-hardened, and you can track the deployments further from these AMIs using Qualys Asset View. So with visibility and automation, Qualys gives you a complete coverage into your deployments into AWS, and it can seamlessly integrate into your DevOps pipeline. Furthermore, we integrate these signals back into your aggregated view within AWS in AWS Security Hub. AWS Security Hub provides you with a fantastic view of security solutions natively to AWS and from its partners. Qualys participates in this program and providing you signals from your Qualys-based deployments back into AWS Security Hub, giving you the visibility you need where you need within the provider itself. With that, let me turn it over to the next speaker, Grant, to talk about his experiences of using Qualys in AWS.
Thanks, Hari. My name is Grant Johnson. I am the Director of Risk and Compliance here at Ancestry. And I'll warn you up front, with this introduction, you're probably going to get to know me a lot better than you'd like. Hey, on the right side of the screen, if you've ever wondered what our DNA product looks like, among the many things you'll get is you'll get a breakdown of where, in this case, my genetic information originates from. Right now, we've got it broken down into 350 distinct global regions where we can trace your DNA back to, and that number is growing every day. And you know, when I came to work for Ancestry, I got to tell you, to me, the idea of genealogy and family history sounded kind of like reading a math book. But as I got into it, just for fun, you know, I could see, you know, my granddad's name is George Washington Johnson, and his dad's name was George Washington Johnson. And he had a brother named Joseph Ellis Johnson, if you can see on here. Now, Joseph was actually a technology guy, and he was the first person to drag one of these new amazing technology, a thing called a camera, into the Salt Lake Valley as this area was being settled in the early 1800s. And like every innovative, groundbreaking technology that emerges, its first use is pornography. He not only took pictures of buildings and old people and mountains, but he had a side gig where he took photos of scantily clad women and sold them via mail order. I almost said online. But today's standards, they're actually kind of adorable. We're talking mid 18th century here. So I mean, it's something like a clavicle and maybe a kneecap if it's really racy. But in fact, the more I dug around in my family history, I discovered, my family actually began to resemble the Adams family rather than maybe the Johnson family. But my history is rife with horse thieves, adulterers, drunkards, convicts, and really bad gunfighters. I could tell one of them was really bad because he died very early in his life, but managed to get his chromosomes into the next generation. So I got to tell you, in making these discoveries, for me at least, I found that it's every bit as exciting to hear of my sketchy family relations and my creepy uncle. And you could see that they lived lives of really rich texture. They were very human. They were good and they're bad. And the thing I could see though is that they're very tough, and a lot of them were very full of vinegar, and it was a lot of fun to find that out. So their lives to me, I think, are just as engaging as if I'd have discovered that I would have descended from some supposed form of nobility. It's just been a lot of fun, and it's completely changed my perspective on genealogy. I think it's anything but boring. Just a little bit about our company. I'll have to ask you to bear with me here. I'm going to give you more background than probably is normal, but what I'm going to talk about is that and our business process, as you can see why we made some of the security decisions that we made as we went through this. So your company is going to be a little bit differently, but hopefully as I describe to you the whys in the decisions that we made, you'll be able to understand and maybe apply those in your environments. So we started out going back a little bit, back in the late 70s as a genealogy magazine. And somewhere in the 90s, we came up with the idea of this MS-DOS based floppy disk genealogy family tree software we could ship to you in a loose leaf sized box with a whole bunch of floppy disks inside. From there, it quickly evolved into jumping into cyberspace and never looking back from that case. Neatly enough, I mean, in the mid 2000s, we actually began experimenting with mitochondrial DNA testing in the hopes that we could maybe enrich in that family history experience and bring people some more understanding about where they come from. And as time passed, we are very lucky to be the world's now largest family genealogy company with billions and billions of records. And we have developed and brought a DNA testing to the consumer market. On that, it took us about 10 years from concept to market to get our DNA sales to 1 million sales. It took us 1 year to do the next million. And from there, it has just absolutely taken off from there. And it leads into part of some of the problems and the decisions we made, which I'll talk more about here. And I'm proud to say humbly that just a week ago, we passed 15 million in terms of DNA kit sales, which we're proud to say we've got the absolute largest DNA repository in the world. So, we're known for our genealogy sites, but we actually have 10 other properties that complement that mission that from newspapers to obituaries to military records, things like that. All of that boils up to about 3 petabytes of data under management. So stepping back here, in about 2016, we made the decision to move everything over to the cloud, where we're going to be a wholly based, complete cloud-based company. We didn't test the waters. We went all in and we're going to burn the ships and do this thing. And as our chief technology announced this at our company a few years ago, he just said, our data center contract expires in 18 months. We're not renewing it. So we've got to be into the cloud by then. So away we went. So we had some challenges and we had some important business goals for us that we were trying to accomplish by migrating to the cloud. So we needed to be global. We really couldn't have our users as we rolled out through Europe in Dublin, Ireland, waiting for their browser to call Murray, Utah, in order to paint the next screen. We had availability and resiliency needs, and we were having some problems. We were plagued with way too many and frequent, albeit brief, outages on our website. And the root cause of those were untested direct production changes, which also suggested we needed to make some process changes as a company and improve our change management process. It bakes into security here. If you'll bear with me, I'll talk more about that. So we also, as I mentioned, we have 3 petabytes of data which from what our database people tell me, that is too big to back up in terms of the way we would need it. So if we were trying to restore our website with 3 petabytes of data, they said it would take about 3 weeks to come back from even the fastest of media, which, as we're a subscription business, we would be completely out of business in that time. And if you're going to run active redundant databases like that in separate geolocations, that basically requires you to double your storage infrastructure and the connectivity between those. One of the other challenges we had is we have also a very distinct business cycle. So we can, during the year, normally we plan and can manage about 5 to 10 transactions a second on our website. But during Black Friday and Cyber Monday, we need to be able to handle about 250 transactions a second. And as you can think, that poses some really interesting architectural problems that you got to think through. So do we invest in big iron and the big piping in the back end to support our peak transaction flow during those days, and then have it run to 2 to 3% capacity during the year? Or do we just try to lease our way around trying to get that kind of capacity at the busy times? Leasing can get tough because you're all of a sudden adding a layer of complexity at the absolute worst time of the year for us, and having to get good at something that you're not doing during the year. Not the least of our problems was security. So we were rapidly making the transition from a genealogy company to where most of our critical customer information was that of dead people who experiences demonstrated that they're actually very understanding and they complain very little, to a DNA company where we were asking people to trust us with their most private genetic information. So we needed to have an end-to-end way to ensure that the data was secure in the development, in storage, in motion, basically throughout every cycle that the data was in. We had to get this right. We really could not fail at either of these tasks, and we did not want to in any way jeopardize our trust relationship with our customers. Our security, in other words, really had to work. So as we went in, we set some, to meet our uptime goals. To tell you how we went about this, we had to deploy each of our servers in our new cloud environment in such a way that they could be replicated and spun up and spun down very quickly and very uniformly. And our plan to do this was we were going to make use of standardized images, machine images and thus. And in supporting this approach, we had to ensure that each of our production instances would run on an image and could be cloned and deployed rapidly. We redesigned really the way that we had to redesign also the way that we looked at security to meet our rapidly altering and constantly changing environment. And I'll tell you, as a vulnerability manager, it was becoming obvious to me that kind of a traditional approach was not going to work at all, as the vast majority of our environment would have a lifespan of, at the most, a month, maybe a day, maybe a week, and as little as a few hours. So in security, we had to alter what we did, and we had to alter our message. So in knowing that we're just not going to succeed if we're sending out vulnerability reports of servers that were taken offline 3 days ago. So we took that as a challenge for us in security to make sure that our teams, our development teams, had actionable information that was also in sync with our new emerging business process here. So what we did is we began scanning from the onset as we went from our database data center based environment to our new cloud environment. We wanted to ensure that as we went through, our development teams were accustomed to seeing vulnerability scans on their systems at a predictable time each week. We really wanted to be able to be looking at those vulnerabilities in test, in development, and in production, and providing that information, and do it from the onset, and rather than wait until we were up and running in our environments. One of the beautiful things that we quickly discovered, both with AWS and with Qualys, is we could take advantage of AWS tagging. In that alone, that one thing right there, we solved one of the most time-consuming problems that I've noticed throughout my career in vulnerability management. Is with those AWS tags, we could require that every one of our systems had a technical owner, cost center information, and things like that. So I didn't have to spend any time looking into a outdated CMDB to try and find out who owns any given system. It was already there. It was already available in our scan information in our AWS system. The other thing that we could take advantage here, having a common platform and being in that cloud, is credentials and authentication. So we could install our scanning credentials on every image, and thus we could scan with a great deal of accuracy and have fully authenticated scans as we run. That, for me as a risk manager, lowers my ability, at least gives me a lot more comfort that I'm seeing a better view of risk than just if I'm trying to scan things from the outside. So there were some other important changes as well that I alluded to. So in moving to the cloud, we took advantage of AWS, and we actually created separate AWS accounts to separate our development, our test environments, and our production accounts. That would reduce the blast radius of any vulnerability compromise that might happen in any of those. Another one of our key changes that the VP of our technology mandated was that, and this was a big change for us, that nobody other than our operations team would have access to production. So if you remember earlier, I talked about one of our key issues was that we were having way too many and too frequent outages caused by untested changes made directly in our production environment. So from now on going forward, there were two methods of fixing a production system. So if they needed to change code, if we needed to move code into the new environment, it had to be done in development, promoted through test, and rolled into prod. And there were some resistance teams, and that had to be done without our development teams having access to the production environment. So as you can imagine, we were making the transition culturally from a small company to a bigger company, and there was a lot of resistance to that. The people who were just terrified of relinquishing that control to that to the production environment, rightly so. But that model just wasn't going to work for us anymore, and this is why. If they went out and somebody made a change to a production box in production, that broke our entire resiliency model. We would no longer have an exact clone of that box if that box were starting to fail, or if we needed to add capacity to that system. We have a snowflake out there, and that's just not going to work. Also, that breaks the model of the way that our development environment and our test environment will no longer match production. There was in response to a lot of the resistance that's from a new scary awakening process, our technology officer came back and said, I'll give every one of you, our development teams, 100% access to production, but we're going to follow 100% accountability if we choose that model, which means if you go into production, you make a change in there and you break something, you're fired. We had to have 100% accountability there. And all of us, including those of us in security, we were all for option one after that. We'll take the whole thing. Nobody has access to production anymore. And it's actually worked very well, which I'll talk a little more about too. So, but one of the things we had to do in security is we had to change our approach as well to the way we fixed vulnerabilities or asked them to be fixed. We couldn't have people going in and actually installing security patches on production anymore, or making policy or group policy setting changes in there. The second way that we would manage our servers that's going to be a little different than the way we did before is that if a server begins to load up and start to error, the first solution of that is going to be to just spin up a new server and kill the old one, basically. So not try to diagnose, not try to log in, not try to fix the failing server, you just replace it. So the mantra in our company going forward was, you need to think of the servers as cattle and not pets. So if a host goes bad, you just spin up a new host and shoot dead the old one rather than wasting time trying to bring the failing host back to health. So it was a pretty good change for us as we went through. And this process in and of itself, this is in security. This is where we had our aha moment, if you will. So we could take advantage of this, and we could install all of our new and emerging patches that come out every month to our base AMI images and focus on that rather than having to contact dozens and dozens of different development teams to patch their own servers. They not only couldn't do that anymore, but we had a centralized place where we could start to harden our devices. We used heavily in this process Qualys. We could scan these images over and over, and we could make sure that they had the latest and greatest security patches on them, and they were hardened in accordance to our standards before they got rolled out. we decided we're going to do this monthly. And as a compromise to make the operations team happy, this was a good news for them as well, because our web operations team, they're the ones responsible for keeping the website lights on. They're always having a freshly rebooted and error-free server running in the background. So it tends to run a lot better if it's fresh like that. The other thing in security that we really liked about it was it reduces dwell time, which, if you're not familiar with that term, that's the amount of time that your system is sitting out there that may have a compromise on it. So in other words, if we have an undiscovered compromise on a host, if we take that host down and replace it every 30 days, that not only takes that host away, but it takes that compromise away and takes the bad guys back to square one on that. So it was going to be something we could help to use and manage risk for us. Another good thing about that approach that we mentioned that we were thinking through is that we would be sending the same message as our operations team, that web operations team would be sending, which is please update to the latest image. So when you have two departments hounding and encouraging disparate teams around our company to change their image and update their image, you tend to be a lot more effective than just the people in security or just the people in operations alone. You got two different teams hounding people to get that done. We scanned our production. We're fully planning on scanning our production environment for vulnerabilities, but in most cases, the only solution that we had to do or thought that we would need to do is just tell people to update their image and don't worry about installing patches because it's going to be on that next image. And that would take care of the majority of our vulnerabilities that we were detecting. For us, as we had looked at all the different options, both AWS and Qualys fit right into our approach as we looked through the various opportunities that we had. So we love the system resiliency that was offered through AWS, that we could exist across multiple availability zones. There was good security, and we had a highly predictable uptime with them. We love the fact that we could just rapidly expand along with our compute needs as they rose and fell during the day or during the year, without having to do many changes at all on our side. And it also supported that global growth model, which we wanted to have. We wouldn't have our Ireland users waiting for a website in Lehigh or in Murray, Utah to load. We could co-locate those kinds of services there and have a better customer experience. Qualys was just as good for us as well, as they've been in AWS a long time. They were seamless about doing things like I mentioned, reading the AWS tags. Thing I loved is I didn't have to feed and water scanning appliances or update any signatures or anything. It could really just kind of set them up, not think about it anymore. And we could really kind of focus on fixing the vulnerabilities that we knew we were going to have. The most important thing I think in our decision there was also the data is correct. I knew that the credibility was on the line with our development teams and the fact that we couldn't put erroneous vulnerability information out there in front of them. We really needed to be, our data needed to be spot on. And so we did a couple things, not only going with Qualys, but Qualys afforded us the opportunity to differentiate between confirmed vulnerabilities and unconfirmed vulnerabilities. And our focus is we're going to focus on the high severity 4 and 5 vulnerabilities. And we're not going to talk about the unconfirmed vulnerabilities, believing that if we focused on fixing those confirmed ones, in a lot of cases, the unconfirmed ones would take care of themselves because we're just going to be patching anyway. And just as a postscript, the beautiful part about it is we've spent virtually no time dealing with our development teams and false positives. So it's been a great fit for us. Now, how did it really go? With the best laid plans, great ideas, new vulnerability approach in a new cloud environment and an ability to scan it. Let me tell you how it went. It went awful initially. It didn't work, in fact, and it went bad and it got a lot worse, and this is how. Initially, we discovered we had more vulnerabilities in our environment, which frankly wasn't too big of a surprise to me than we initially thought. But the surprise is over the months, our vulnerability counts trying to use this process did nothing but get worse and worse and worse, and they went up. And it just looked like none of the things that we had thought through were working at all. But when we whiteboarded this whole thing and came up with this idea, the reason for the jump in vulnerabilities was we weren't patching our old servers located in our data center. Now, parenthetically speaking, we have a group of where our critical customer information is. Those were patched within a number of hours, but I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about kind of our standard load working a server environment. We just had to make a tactical decision to not patch those, as we were really diverting our resources to make sure to move into the cloud. And as much as all of us would like to, we can't do everything at once in any company. And so our new servers were coming on, they were fully authenticated, and our first round or two came out with some vulnerabilities on them. And we were detecting things at a higher and higher rate as we worked. Not only that, is those servers that were unpatched over month would degrade very rapidly in terms of the risk profile, and they'd see more and more vulnerabilities. It was taking our teams a lot of time to develop to moving to that monthly cycle that we talked about, to where we would create images with those new updates and the new patches on them. But it was hard to get people to move to that sort of rhythm, and it was like pulling teeth initially, and rightly so. They were trying to get us to the cloud, and so they had to do a lot of things all at once. So it was taking a long time, and to be honest with you, we really started to question whether this process was going to work or not. But I just could not bear the thought of really going back to sending out monthly reports to people and then trying to track vulnerabilities to closure. It just seemed like this thing had to work on paper. So, but at this point in time, as we began to develop that internal discipline of those regular image updates to where our development teams were moving those into production, what we also did is in security, we negotiated that automatic day in our development teams every month. Just one day could you spend updating to the latest image. And in turn, what we're going to promise them is we're not going to constantly be dinging them, asking them to install patches. The majority of our vulnerabilities that come out every month can be handled through this process, and we won't have to be constantly contacting them on this. So again, our ask and our operational team's ask was just move on to the latest image and update your image every month. So one of the adjustments we had to make in security to that too is we had to all of a sudden become comfortable with a process and waiting for patches to be installed. And I mean, let's be honest, for any of us who work in security, we don't do patience very well. If somebody asks us how long they will give them to install patches, it's everything we can say not to just say, hey, yesterday, because we want that risk mitigated as absolutely as fast as we can. And it was really hard to sit back and kind of wait for a process to work. However, I mean, we could see that the trade-off in kind of using this process rather than a process by exception, all of those vulnerabilities that we may have identified yesterday would be gone through our monthly image process eventually, and that would be actually more thorough and faster overall than the methods that we had tried to use in the past with this. So at that point where it was getting worse, what was really cool is eventually we could start to see that when our new servers were coming online, they were coming on hardened, but still our metrics went in the wrong direction. And we just hit this point at when those new servers were up and running in our hardened cloud environment, and we started to shut and sunset those servers down in our data center. And over the course of about 14 days, our vulnerabilities just fell through the floor. In fact, it was so fast, there was just a side note, there was a little bit of a lag time between when we knew the servers were getting shut off and to where our scan cycles would actually capture that information. And my chief information security officer, who I report to, texted me on a Sunday and said, hey, I think our scans are busted because our vulnerabilities have just disappeared in mass. Something's wrong. And it was a lot of fun to start digging into that. And as we investigated that, what we had found is just over that 14-day period, those old vulnerable servers went off, and there was at least an 80% drop in the numbers that we were used to seeing over those 4 or 5 months. And it just borne out that it looked like our process was actually going to work. So as we got into that, we kind of stumbled into this whole thing, and I'll tell you, it's better to be lucky than smart. And there were a lot of things lucky about this whole thing, but I'll tell you the things that we did control and did right. I've observed over the years that a standalone vulnerability management program is kind of like a crash diet, I tell people, and it really don't work over the long term, or they don't work at all. So if you really want to lose the weight, you're better off just kind of creating an eating strategy that you can live with on a day in, day out basis, an exercise plan of something that you enjoy, and the weight takes care of itself. And the same exact thing applies with vulnerability management, I believe. So we need an approach that is baked into the process, not bolted on, and that would be something that we do naturally and something that's easily done. The key success factors, I think, really, it's just if I had to point to a few of them on here, is that we had the same message from operations, which is just update that image instead of them saying one thing, and in addition to that, security's asking them to patch. So it was great having several of us teams saying, please update your image. That just made us perfectly in line with our business goals and our new business process, and really baked us in rather than being a break fix or an exception or an emergency process for security fixes. The best part about this process that we've been doing is we're running with it for about 16 months now, and it seems to be sustainable. And by that, it's because when a new vulnerability comes out, we don't have to tell anybody, basically. We just need to basically tell our teams, make sure that it's baked into the new image, and then when that image is released, to have our teams update to that image. So there's not a lot of burn rate from security constantly contacting people. And I love the fact that we're working towards almost fully authenticated scans in every one of our environments. It's there, our credentials are there, and that gives me a lot of comfort as a risk manager as well, that our scans are thorough and that we're getting a good look at actually what our real risk is. So that's all I have. I appreciate those of you who have sticking with me here, and I hope this was of help. And Josh, I will turn the time back over to you.
Thanks, Grant. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. All right, let's take some questions we've got in. The first one is going to be a two-parter. I'm going to target it first to Philip Simpson from AWS, and then Grant, you're going to take it for Ancestry, if you don't mind. How does AWS and Ancestry comply with GDPR? Philip, could you answer that from a GDPR side, from AWS's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And just, for those that don't know, GDPR is the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. Came in 2018, and it's really focused on protecting the personal information of European Union's citizens and subjects and their right to privacy. So from the AWS point of view, we announced in March 2018, which was about 2 months before the regulations came in, that all AWS services were AWS ready. We have about 500 security services and features that can help customers on their GDPR journey. But the main thing to remember, as Josh mentioned, is the shared responsibility model that Josh talked about. AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, but the customer retains responsibility for security in the cloud. And that's where they can work with not just AWS, but our partners like Qualys to make sure they understand and are meeting their responsibilities. We have a huge wealth of information that we have on this topic that won't fit on this webinar. But I would certainly recommend anyone who has questions around AWS and GDPR. We have a website at aws.amazon.com/compliance/GDPR-center, and we'll throw that into the chat window. And we have a huge wealth, not just of how we handle it, but best practices and white papers and recommendations. And we have, every goal to help customers along on their GDPR journey. So maybe I'll hand over to Grant to talk about Ancestry.
Yeah, no, GDPR is a vital interest for us. And what we liked in both environments is what we didn't collect as well as what we did collect. In the Qualys scans, what we could do is that did not gather a lot of sensitive information that we might otherwise be at risk at beyond the IP address. And the other thing, it's gathering information really about our own servers, but gathers nothing about our customer servers. And in complying with GDPR, we want to make sure that our customers can trust the fact that we have a hardened environment, that you do everything you can to make sure that that data is secure. So I think that would be kind of how I would tend to answer that question. So great question, by the way.
Hari, this one is for you. Is Qualys plug and play on AWS? How is it related to CloudTrail and CloudWatch?
Absolutely. Qualys solutions are available to be directly bought and deployed directly from the AWS marketplace. In that sense, it's easy to kind of get you started. At the same time, the Qualys sensors, which like cloud agents or the scanner appliances, which you can use for scanning solutions, both of them are plug and play with Qualys. I would say directly with AWS. And then coming to the next question about CloudTrail and CloudWatch, Qualys today hits up on the public API, which is available from AWS, to identify the inventory and the state of the inventory in AWS by polling it. We are also planning to extend that further to get more near real time by integrating with CloudTrail and CloudWatch.
Great. Grant, this question is for you. How long did it take you from the time you started to see Sev 4, Sev 5 ramping up until it flattened and then started going back down?
You know, I'd say that was really dependent on the sunsetting cycle and the development cycle as we went into the cloud. And it was, it felt like a long time, but it really turned out to be maybe a couple of months. Really, is where we were in that cycle, that things were just going the wrong direction. And it was just really a matter of how fast that we could get everything off of the old servers onto the new ones, and then let them run for a while, and then just sunset those things. I think one of the things that pushed that number, it made it look a little worse than it did, is immediately after we could get everything moved into the cloud, those production servers were sort of, the old ones in the data center were no longer in use, but they were still online. And we're kind of really sitting there to make sure that everything's going to run okay. They weren't processing data anymore. And they stayed online for that would be one of the things I think that contributed to what felt like a little longer. So it worked into, you know, a couple months before we really started to see that plateau and then the sudden drop.
Great. Hari, I have a question for you. How are DevSecOps organizations gaining a competitive advantage?
That's a fantastic question. So nobody says no to automation, right? So DevSecOps is about automating security into the DevOps process. With the automation and doing things in a different time or an earlier time in the cycle, more strategically placed, helps companies in avoiding problems later on. Grant's presentation kind of set a great example for that, how the vulnerability detection and the vulnerabilities identified in the production environment kind of drastically reduced when they were able to take care of it ahead of time. So integrating security into DevOps helps companies to gain a huge advantage compared to other mechanisms, as you have an opportunity to standardize and clean up things ahead of time, helping you to reduce your investments and your ongoing production environments.
Great. Grant, for you, did you implement the Qualys agents to scan the servers, or was it the virtual Qualys appliance that provided the internal scanning?
Oh, sure. We actually wound up, for our server team, felt like the best option for us was actually using the appliance. We've seen some targeted places where we're going to and plan on making use of agents, but I think the determining factor for us is egress. So with agents, there's an advantage to having that immediately there, but there was concern, and we wanted to make sure that it was just the appliance that would talk into the inner rings and the other accounts, and didn't feel like the agent was quite a good fit because we'd have to let each one of those servers egress to that environment. So it really wound up being most of it, and pretty much 100% for our servers, we've been using the appliance scan that way, and a number of appliances located throughout Amazon's availability zone. So we can geolocate them into the places throughout the world that we're located, so they're close to the actual servers that they're running.
Great. I think we have time for one quick question. Does Qualys support containerized architectures? Hari?
Yes, absolutely. Qualys provides a container security solution which comprehensively supports the entire life cycle of containers, starting from through the build, ship, and run. So you can scan your images, which is in your pipeline for vulnerabilities and compliance issues. You can scan your registries, which you and identify vulnerabilities, and the same time bookmark them or kind of add a signature to them to know that what images are there and what is getting spun up. And you can also kind of have visibility in time protection capabilities enabled to prevent them from any kind of an anomalous activity on running containers. So Qualys provides you with a comprehensive set of solutions available for containers, which applies in the coming to case of AWS, ECS, EKS, Fargate, and your repository in AWS ECR. All of that can be covered under the Qualys solutions.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. I'd like to thank everyone for their time this afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on what time zone you're in. Hari and Grant, I appreciate your time as well. And everyone have a great day.